The world's first democracy was destroyed in 480 BC when the world's largest army, under the leadership of a king who considered himself a heavenly authority, fell upon Greece. A tiny mountain pass known as the Hot Gates and a small Greek force composed of 300 of the most disciplined fighters in history, known as the Spartans, stood in their way. This is the account of their fabled final stand, a fight that would stand as a testament to bravery in the face of insurmountable odds for all eternity. However, what actually took place at Thermopylae? What impact did these few men have on the history of the West? We must go back 10 years to the plains of Marathon in 490 BC in order to truly comprehend what transpired at Thermopylae. King Darius the Great commanded the first Persian invasion of Greece, which was horribly and shamefully put down here. The Persian soldiers were driven back across the Aegean Sea by a smaller, more determined army led by the Athenians. This was an insult Darius just could not take. Instead of punishing Athens for aiding a Greek uprising, he had destroyed the reputation of his realm. Darius promised retribution, but he would not live to see it through. Xerxes I, his son and heir, inherited his ferocious desire for conquest. Xerxes was doing more than just completing his father's task. He believed he was a ruler anointed by God, meant to take over where his father had failed. He was resolved to finally defeat the rebellious Greeks. In addition to punishing them, he intended to incorporate all of Greece into his enormous, constantly growing empire. For 4 years, Xerxes assembled the biggest army the world had ever seen. He recruited men from all over his vast territory, from Egypt to Bactria, from Mesopotamia to India. The army had millions of men, according to the ancient historian Herodotus, a figure that contemporary historians believe is greatly inflated. Even the more modest contemporary estimates, however, are astounding and point to a ground force of between 70,000 and 300,000 soldiers, supported by an enormous fleet of more than 1,200 warships.
Xerxes commanded amazing engineering marvels to enable this invasion. To help his fleet avoid a dangerous shoreline, he had a canal constructed through a peninsula. More audaciously, he ordered the construction of a mile-long pontoon bridge, a bridge made of ships that would span the Hellespont Strait and allow his army to literally stroll from Asia into Europe. An angry Xerxes is said to have ordered the river to be lashed 300 times and had the original engineers killed when a storm destroyed the first bridge. Everything you need to know about the man spearheading the invasion is revealed here. His resources appeared to be endless, and his power was absolute. Fear swept over the Greek city-states as word of this dreadful force spread. Many northern nations succumbed to Persian rule because they saw little use in resisting. Greece was a fragmented group of warring nations that were frequently at war with one another rather than a single nation. They had a choice now that they were in danger of complete destruction. Either stand together and fight for their freedom or bow down to the Persian ruler. A tenuous alliance developed during this crisis, and Sparta, the state that everyone agreed was Greece's most powerful military state, took control of their ground troops. It is impossible to comprehend Thermopylae without comprehending Sparta. A true anomaly in ancient Greece was Sparta. Sparta was honing one lethal art: war, while towns like Athens experimented with democracy, philosophy, and the arts. Their entire society was a machine built to create the best troops in the world. The Agoga was the name of this system. The state defined a Spartan male's life from birth. Newborns were examined by elders, and those who were judged weak or flawed were abandoned to perish on a hillside. The first test was survival. Boys were separated from their families at the age of 7 and sent to the Agog, a cruel, state-sponsored training program that lasted more than 10 years. Although they were taught to read and write, the primary curriculum was centered on discipline, survival, and combat.
They were purposefully underfed while living in barracks, which encouraged them to steal food, a perfect tactic for a campaign. If they were detected, they were severely punished for their incapacity to avoid detection rather than for stealing. They learned to respect Sparta's well-being over their own lives, to accept orders without question, and to bear excruciating torture without protesting. Peak physical fitness, weapon proficiency, and the intricate maneuvers of the phalanx formation were the main objectives of their relentless training. Short, clever statements, or what we now refer to as laconic words, were a hallmark of Spartan civilization. The greatest virtue was courage. The greatest disgrace is cowardice. When soldiers fled a battle, they were labeled as misfits and avoided by all. The terror of dying in combat was frequently outweighed by the horror of that social death. In Greece, even Spartan women were exceptional. They participated in sports, received an education, and enjoyed a degree of freedom that was unprecedented in other cities. Their primary responsibility was to produce robust boys for Sparta. According to a well-known Spartan proverb, mothers advised their boys to return from combat either on or with their shield. That is, come back triumphant or perish trying. A soldier would have had to remove his bulky shield in order to escape. King Leonidas and his 300 royal bodyguards were created using this approach. The Spartan ideal was embodied by men who had been tempered by the Agoges fires. The Greek alliance had to devise a strategy as Xerxes' monstrous army advanced southward, the Hellenic League. A combined land and sea operation was suggested by the astute strategist Themistocles, the general of Athens. The plan was to stop the Persian fleet at a tight strait and block the Persian infantry at a tiny pass. By doing this, the navy would be unable to flank and replenish the force on land. Because of the sulfur springs in the area, they chose a pass called Thermopylae, which translates to hot gates in Greek, as the location for the land defense.
This was a great geographic decision. The pass was a slender passageway, perhaps just 100 meters wide, sandwiched between precipitous mountains and the ocean in 480 BC. The Persians' greatest advantage, their enormous numbers, would be neutralized by this topography, which would operate as a force multiplier and force them to engage in a vicious, level-playing battle. One of the kings of Sparta, Leonidas, was tasked with guarding this pass. However, there was an issue. The Olympic Games and Sparta's own Carneia festival, two of the most revered Greek holidays, coincided with the invasion. Spartan law severely prohibited any military activity during the Carneia. The elders of Sparta came up with a solution because they were torn between the literal end of their world and sacred law. Although they were unable to send the entire army, they would permit Leonidas to march north right away with his 300-man personal bodyguard. These warriors weren't your average ones. Leonidas personally selected these outstanding veterans. A terrifying detail is added by Herodotus. In order to ensure that their family lines would not be eliminated, Leonidas intentionally selected men who already had sons. This implies that Leonidas was aware that this journey might only go one way. The most esteemed spiritual authority in Greece, the oracle at Delhi, was consulted by Leonidas prior to his departure. The oracle's prophecy was ambiguous and frightening. "Hark, you Spartan citizens of the vast streets. Either the sons of Perseus will raid your magnificent city, or else the entire Lacedaemon region will lament the passing of a Heracles-related king." It was an obvious message. Either a Spartan monarch had to perish, or Sparta itself would collapse. The decision wasn't really a choice at all for a man like Leonidas, who was raised with the Spartan values of sacrifice and responsibility.
He gathered allies as he marched north to meet his fate. The Greek troop, which included Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, and others, numbered about 7,000 soldiers by the time he arrived at Thermopylae.
It was a little force up against an imperial powerhouse, but they would stand at the hot, tiny gates. The Greeks quickly began planning their defense as soon as they arrived at Thermopylae. They placed their forces behind the Phocian Wall, an ancient structure that had been restored to block the pass's narrowest section. The hoplites, the heavily armored infantrymen of ancient Greece, were the backbone of this army. In the past, a hoplite was a type of tank. In addition to the famous Corinthian helmet that encased his entire head, he donned bronze leg guards and a bronze breastplate. A doru, a long spear, was his primary weapon. He also carried a small sword, the xiphos, for close combat. The hoplon, however, a huge round wood and bronze shield that shielded him from neck to knee, was his most important piece of equipment. The phalanx were the name of the formation in which the hoplites fought. They formed a strong wall of bronze by standing shoulder to shoulder and overlapping their shields. A lethal forest of spear points was formed as the warriors in the first few ranks aimed their long spears forward. It was almost impossible to break a disciplined phalanx, particularly in a small area where it could not be flanked. Leonidas intended to deploy this barricade to halt the Persian army. The Persian army soon came. As far as the eye could see, there was a sea of men and horses. On a nearby hill, King Xerxes positioned his throne to see the conflict. He didn't do anything for 4 days. He did nothing except wait. He was truly shocked that this small contingent of soldiers would really oppose him. He demanded their surrender through a message. The historian Plutarch claims that Leonidas's response was renowned for being brief. "Come grab them." Xerxes was certain that the Greeks would flee at the sight of his army. But the Greeks remained stationary. Before a war they knew they would not survive, they brushed their long hair, performed athletic exercises, and carefully oiled their bodies, all Spartan traditions.
At last, Xerxes' patience gave out. He gave the order for the attack on the 5th day. The battle started with a hail of arrows rather than a charge. Herodotus is credited with writing that the arrows were so dense that they blocked out the sun when Xerxes ordered his archers to fire. At this point, the Spartan Dionysius is said to have said, "Good, after that we will fight in the shade." The Greeks simply raised their bulky shields, forming a bronze shell that blocked the arrows with ease. Exasperated, Xerxes ordered the Medes and Scythians, his first wave of 10,000 infantrymen, to seize the Greeks and deliver them to him. The wave struck the wall of the Spartan shield. A slaughter was the outcome. The Persian infantry, armed with wicker shields and shorter spears, was completely outclassed. Their spears were too short to reach the Greeks, and their shields broke under the bronze hoplons. Meanwhile, from the protection of their phalanx, the Greeks thrust forward methodically. It was like bumping into a meat grinder for the Persians. The ranks behind them trampled men in the front as they fell. Soon, the pass was choked with corpses. The Greeks, who were battling in relays to stay fresh, did not concede an inch. Xerxes, enraged, watched from his throne. While the Greeks suffered only minor losses, he had sent thousands of his soldiers at them, and they had returned with horrifying casualties. The first day was a spectacular success for Leonidas and a complete failure for the Persians. They had demonstrated that better equipment and training could overcome insurmountable obstacles in the confined space of the hot gates.
However, the day was far from finished, and Xerxes was going to give it his all. A furious Xerxes decided it was time to send in his elite as the first day came to a conclusion. He summoned the legendary force known to the Greeks as the Immortals, his own royal guard. This corps of 10,000 of the best fighters in the Persian Empire were known as Immortals because, in the event that a soldier was killed or became ill, he was promptly replaced, giving the impression that the force was unbeatable and unstoppable.
Compared to the ordinary infantry, these were professional soldiers with better weapons. Their armor glittered as they marched into the pass, a sight to see. Xerxes was confident that his immortals would triumph where the others had failed. He was mistaken. The Greek line was attacked with disciplined rage by the immortals, but the outcome remained the same. They were unable to shatter the phalanx. The feinting retreat was a novel tactic used by the Greeks throughout the battle. To fool the Persians into a chaotic pursuit, the phalanx would seem as though they were breaking and fleeing. On cue, the Greeks would turn abruptly, rapidly reorganize their shield wall, and slaughter the overextended and startled adversary. Herodotus claims that when he saw even his best soldiers being sliced to pieces, Xerxes literally sprung off his throne 3 times in exasperation. The bodies of his finest troops littered the pass like a slaughterhouse. The Persians had lost thousands of men by the end of the second day. The Persian army's morale was at an all-time low, but the Greek line remained intact. The Greek stance appeared to be unachievable. An army of nearly 100,000 soldiers had been repelled by roughly 7,000 troops for 2 entire days. Leonidas's plan was doing quite fine. But as the Greeks were sleeping, someone stepped out of the darkness, a man whose name would forever be associated with treachery. Ephialus was the man's name. Being a native, he was intimately familiar with the mountains surrounding Thermopylae. He traveled to Xerxes' camp with a secret that would guarantee the 300 Spartans doom: the Onopa Road, a secret mountain trail that wound around the pass and emerged behind the Greek position. The Persian king had promised him a substantial payment. The problem is that Leonidas was aware of this route. To protect the peak, he had positioned 1,000 Phocian warriors there. Seizing upon this treason, Xerxes promptly dispatched his commander, Hyrne, and the elite immortals to pursue Ephialus along the road while it was still dark.
Throughout the night, the Persians marched. They discovered the Phocian guards as daylight broke. Herodotus claims that the first warning the Phocians had was the rustling of leaves from the approaching army. The Phocians, believing they were the primary target, withdrew up the mountain to take a position after a barrage of Persian arrows. This was a deadly error. They were of no importance to the Persians. Ignoring them, they proceeded to follow Leonidas along the route. To deliver the heartbreaking news to Leonidas, a Phocian courier scurried down the mountain. They were going to become stuck. The stance could no longer be justified. The conflict was lost. Leonidas summoned a meeting right away. The army would undoubtedly be destroyed since Persians were poised to assault from both the front and the back. In order to preserve the army for future battles, the majority of allied leaders advocated for an early withdrawal. Leonidas concurred. He told the Greek troops to leave as soon as possible, dismissing the majority of them. This was not a surrender. It was a calculated decision. The purpose of the stance was always to delay. Additionally, they had already achieved success by holding the pass for more than 2 days and forcing the Persians to pay for every inch of blood. Now, it was crucial that the remaining soldiers flee and carry on the battle. However, Leonidas had no intention of leaving. Retreating was an unimaginable shame for a Spartan ruler. The oracle's prophecy and Spartan law tied him. He would remain with his 300 Spartans, holding the pass to cover their comrades' retreat and achieving their destiny. They would be the rearguard. Not all of them were alone. The entire contingent of 700 troops from the city of Thespia, under the direction of their commander, Demophilus, made the selfless decision to remain and perish with the Spartans in an act of extraordinary bravery that is sometimes disregarded. Their bravery was powerfully demonstrated by their sacrifice. Instead of battling to the death, the 400 Thebans are thought to have given up to the Persians during the last stand.
There were probably some Spartan helots and servants as well. Thus, the rearguard was in place. Against the complete power of the Persian army, there were about 1,500 men in total. 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans who either surrendered or were compelled to remain, and a few Spartan helots. Leonidas reportedly ordered his soldiers to eat a large breakfast because they would be dining in the underworld that evening, indicating that he knew the end was imminent. The Greeks did not wait behind their wall when the last attack started. With the intention of killing as many Persians as they could, they moved into the pass's wider area. The violence that ensued was utterly frantic. The rest of the Greeks fought with a ferocity that came from determination. According to Herodotus, they fought with swords when their spears broke. They used their hands and fangs to fight when their swords broke. A bloody skirmish erupted over Leonidas' body as he collapsed in the center of the conflict. The sheer volume of Persians eventually became overwhelming. After being driven back, the Greeks made their last stand atop a small hill. They were surrounded on all sides and ultimately destroyed by a hail of Persian arrows. Almost all of the Spartans and Thespians were dead at the end. The hot gates were down. Thermopylae appeared to be a resounding triumph for Persia. With the route to southern Greece unobstructed, Xerxes' army advanced southward, destroying the evacuated city of Athens in the process. Even by the standards of the time, Xerxes' ultimate outburst of wrath resulted in the decapitation and crucifixion of Leonidas' body. However, their sacrifice was far from pointless. The 3-day delay strategically allowed the Greek allies to be ready for the next stage of the conflict. A few weeks later, Themistocles' Greek fleet achieved a crushing victory in the naval battle of Salamis, after luring the larger Persian navy into tight passages similar to a Thermopylae. Inspired by the valor at Thermopylae, a united Greek army defeated the remaining Persian ground forces at the Battle of Plataea the following year, thus ending the invasion.
However, Thermopylae's true legacy extends far beyond military tactics. It was practically instantly a legend. The Greeks achieved a huge propaganda victory that raised spirits and created a previously unheard-of sense of solidarity. It evolved into a timeless representation of bravery in the face of overwhelming adversity, selflessness for the sake of a higher good, and defiance of oppression. King Leonidas was honored with a stone lion at Thermopylae following the conflict. To honor the 300, the poet Simonides is credited with carving a well-known epitaph on a stone that reads, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, faithful to their laws, we lie." Soldiers, leaders, and artists have been motivated by the tale of the 300 Spartans for 2,500 years. It has been repeated in books, poetry, and the well-known graphic novel and film 300, which, despite many artistic licenses, managed to retain the legend's unadulterated heroic spirit. Thermopylae serves as the perfect reminder that the winners don't write history. It is also influenced by the moral strength of people who, in the face of defeat, do not give up. It's a tale that demonstrates how a tiny, tenacious group of individuals can make a big difference in the world, and how some victories are so spectacular they last a lifetime. The Hot Gate sacrifice marked a beginning rather than a conclusion. In the end, it served to maintain a culture that served as the foundation for Western civilization by kindling the flames of Greek resistance. Make sure to hit the notification bell and subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more about important historical occasions and famous last stands. Which historical epic battle would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments.
I appreciate you watching.